Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pete Burden, and I'm your host today on the Healthy Power Alliance podcast. We're using this space to explore what it means to be powerful together, to look at how human power, particularly as it appears in organisations and communities, can benefit other humans and the planet we all depend upon. We're speaking with the people who are in the middle of doing that, people who think they know how to do it, and people who are doing in-depth academic studies of what works and probably what doesn't as well. We love theory, but we're mostly interested in practice, so what people are actually doing. So with that said, let's get into the depths with our current guest, who is Huda Jawad. Hi, Huda. Lovely to have you with us.
Hello.
Great, thanks. I'm going to say just a few words about my understanding of your role and what you do, but then please correct me and point out where I've got it wrong. As I understand it, you're essentially a kind of anti-racist activist and a campaigner, particularly against violence against women and girls. That's a big kind of aspect of it for you. You're also a feminist and a person of faith, notably a Muslim person of faith. And currently, your current role is executive director of something called Faith and VAWG Coalition, which, as I understand it, again, is a coalition of voices. I guess both faith voices and people who have things to say about preventing violence against women and girls. The other thing that I picked up was in your past, you were one of the Three Hijabis, which was a group that was kind of formed to combat racism. I think was it after the 2020 the racism that emerged after the
Euros,
the Euros, so 2020, something
yeah.
like that. So
Well, the match happened in 2021, but yes.
oh right, okay. I'm not a huge football fan, so I probably got that, but I do remember the incident, and I do remember the work you were doing, and you organised a huge petition and all of those kind of things. Is that the beginning anyway? Do you want to flesh that out a little bit and say a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here.
Pleasure.
Yeah, you're right. I'm the co-founder and executive director of something called the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition. We are an organization and a charity that tries to center the voices of women who've experienced violence, but also who have a faith identity. And from our experience and our work, we know that women of faith face barriers to accessing justice and support. And so we want to work within the system to remove those barriers. I still do work as a campaigner with the Three Hijabis, and we're still doing work. So we're, actively trying to disrupt systems that maintain power, that discriminates and stops people from being their best selves. And so, yeah, it's a work that I both enjoy and find very frustrating, but I think I enjoy looking at power and how it impacts our lives both collectively and individually.
Perfect, brilliant. Well, that sounds like the basis for a lovely conversation. So yeah, very pleased to have you along with us then. So just before we get into it, I just want to say something about how we're thinking about power. And we're using a very simple definition of power so that we avoid all the kind of academic debates. And the definition is simply really getting your needs met or achieving your goals, something like that. And then what we mean by healthy power is doing that in a way that rather than taking away from other people, it actually increases other people's power at the same time. So that's our kind of definition. But I'm interested to hear from you. Does that make sense as a definition? And is that kind of partly what you're engaged in perhaps at a bigger level?
Yeah, no, I think that's quite a helpful definition, certainly, and it reframes certainly mine and other people's experience of power, which are probably yours as well, which is often that it's power that is punitive, that is punishing, that is harmful, that is extractive and transactional. And so I guess the trajectory of the work of the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition and the Three Hijabis is around holding that form of power to account and sort of mobilizing people to work towards and embody the kind of power that you talk about. And so we definitely recognize that we operate in a system, the world is organized in a system that enables certain groups to have more power over than increase the power of everyone in that system. And so it's about trying to recalibrate that and transform that so that everyone can be their best selves and have more choice and fulfill their needs in a way that is liberatory and healing and generative rather than punitive or harmful or extractive.
Lovely. I really like those words you're using about allowing people to be their best selves. It's a kind of really nice trajectory, isn't it? And as you say, you're trying to help people shift from the more prevalent, I guess, kind of toxic forms of power, or also power over is another word that came to mind as you were speaking, towards this more inclusive kind of power together, building power together. You know, that's great. Could you then say a little bit about your experience of power? I mean, when did you first start to think about power at all and discover power as a thing in your life?
Well, as a child, really,
Okay.
you know, obviously you have the interpersonal relationship with your parents and sort of not being allowed to do certain things and respecting
Yeah.
that or not respecting that. But uh, systemic power was, I guess, I felt on a cellular level, but I did not sort of articulate at the age of 2.5 when my parents had to flee my country of birth, which is Iraq, because they were political opponents to the then Saddam Hussein regime. And my parents, particularly my mother, relates to the story of how when my father had to flee, I was the firstborn, so there's no other siblings. I spent months just crying for missing my dad. And then a couple of months later, mum had to join him or wanted to join him, but had to flee because she was being persecuted. And so at a very young age, without even being able to understand or articulate the experience of having power over or being powered over, my body felt it. And then throughout my life, I have been a multiple child refugee. And then coming to this country at the age of 11, and then understanding this kind of being a person of faith in a secular world, and then being a woman, and kind of particularly when I did have a child, and the fact that actually there is a systemic response to me being a woman who has a child in the workplace. That meant, you know, that trajectory, that experience really kind of crystallized all my different harmful experiences of power and how I need to navigate myself in those multiple systems.
No, that's really interesting, and particularly the, as you said, the kind of cellular experience of kind of power, even at a very young age. I mean, I think we all grow up with that to some extent, don't we? The fact that as a child you're kind of experiencing the world in some way, and then it sounds like over time you started to kind of understand that, well, express it verbally, and then more able to kind of intellectually get a grasp on it, and multiple experiences helping you kind of understand it. Did you then also start to talk about power? Do you remember when you started to be able to kind of verbalize it and say, oh, this is not right or something?
Yeah, so I think when I was very young, obviously I lived in the Middle East, and I understood the link between power, politics, and faith at a very young age because having being a Muslim is not enough. I was a Shia Muslim, which is a minority in the Muslim community or world community, and the Middle East particularly has a very punitive response to Shia Muslims, and I mean the Middle East political system as opposed to people in general. And so I remember at a very young age, my parents used to say to me, when you go to school and if they ask you, how do you pray, what kind of Muslim you are, all of that stuff, you must hide it. You must not share the truth because it's not safe. And so at a very young age, I was very aware, hyper aware, that actually I there's something not okay about me in this world, and I need to moderate my behavior and my language in order to be safe. Because not only was I the wrong Muslim, but my parents were being persecuted and chased by the regime. So if people were asking me about my parents or where I come from and why am I here and not there, I also had to moderate that and be careful about my choices. But I guess when as I came to this country and received a sense of freedom about my culture, right, my religious identity, I felt that I could stop hiding and be more open about my kind of creed, if you like. But then I realized actually people started asking me, are you British or are you Muslim? And somehow the way that question was framed constantly was saying, you're one or the other, you can't be both. And again, there is an assumption about, well, if you're one, then you're and not the other, then you're not okay. And that has consequences. And so at that age, I guess when I was 17, I began to actively think, no, I need to take hold of this narrative and I need to detangle it and reply back in a way that says I belong and that question is wrong. And so from a very young age, I guess from 17, I could articulate that and I could understand that there is power in that question, and that question is coming from a place which has already decided the answer. And I was saying no, that the answer that you want me to give is not appropriate, and I need you to change that question.
That's lovely. So the wrong question is being asked, and therefore it's impossible to give a correct answer to that question because it's the wrong question in the first place. And then you're also bringing in the idea of kind of intersectionality. How could you say a little bit more about that and how you've managed to kind of connect those two and multiple sides of yourself? How did you figure that out?
So I guess when I was safe to be Shia Muslim, I very quickly realized I actually sometimes being a Muslim is not safe either. And actually sometimes being a Muslim woman is a reason that gives some people the impression that they have a right to my body, my decisions, my thinking, and my choices in the world. And depending on who and which type of person I was with. So sometimes being in Muslim spaces meant that I was comfortable in my Muslimness to some extent, but I had to police my femininity and womanhood. And sometimes being in a secular space meant that I had to police my religiosity, my spirituality, my choices of dress, but also that actually being a woman of faith and of a Muslim faith was really a trigger for some conversations that weren't appropriate or that kind of gave people the assumption that they could speak to me in a certain way. So I guess, and then when I did become mother, I think it very quickly, I quickly made the connection that actually patriarchy, secularism, kind of white supremacy,
Mm-hmm.
are all things that are constantly acting upon me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I have to navigate them. Um, yeah, and it wasn't until I started working in the women's sector that I really was able to name this. And I guess I came to this sector when I was 31 or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm
And
47 now, so yeah.
it's great. Thank you. It's so useful. And so then again, I'm getting this sense of not just the one system that is persecutory in some
Hmm.
sense, but these multiple systems. So paternalism, secularism, white supremacy, etc. And
Yeah.
all of those, depending on where, which one you're immersed in at the moment, having a particular kind of impact on you. And therefore the need to kind of somehow understand maybe the commonalities between all of those systems
Mhm.
and that they're all persecutory in some sense.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that's coming across to me very strongly is, well, first of all, as you said, the kind of threat of violence, I mean, running through all of this as well from a
Yeah.
very early age. And therefore the need to kind of police yourself and adjust your behavior in relation to all of that. And then I'm guessing, or I'm hearing, I think, and guessing perhaps, something about voice in all of this.
Mm.
So here, as you said, you gave the example of a question being asked of you that was inappropriate. And
Mm.
then kind of what I'm imagining is you somehow learning to kind of speak back. And
Yes.
I'm really curious about how did that all come about over the years? How did you learn to speak back?
Yes, I think it was really very hard because and talking of voice and speaking, I came to this country without a word of English, so
Well,
I had to
first of all, learn English. Yeah.
yes, and I remember being going straight to secondary school and saying uh, uh, like talking to myself internally and saying I want to say so much, but I don't have the words, and that being really frustrating.
Mm,
And because I didn't have the words and the language, the level of assumptions that impacted how I was treated was really staggering. That like the way that people just assumed I was thick or that I was simple or that I was naive or didn't have, I was treated very much like somebody who was mentally challenged and were not experienced in the way of the world.
hmm
Like,
hmm
but I was probably the most adult of the children of the whole school because I'd gone through like being displacement, parental separation,
hmm
you know, living homeless, all of that before I was 11. So,
mm,
I had seen a lot more life than probably some of my teachers. Um,
mm,
so I guess that urge to kind of have the words by learning the language formally, but then learning that there is a code that you had to use. Um, I both loved, I love words, and I really am very intentional about how I use them because I want to be understood very clearly. And I know I have learnt that unless I say the words, someone will speak on my behalf and will not
hmm
reflect my authentic reality or myself. So
mm,
it's as much of a defense mechanism as um, a you know a way of asserting one's identity as much as like wanting to be understood properly.
mm,
So they in some ways are both a weapon and a solace because I had to be in a community that um, helped me to understand what it was like to be a minority within a minority, being a Shia Muslim woman in a secular white supremacist patriarchal capitalist society that
hmm
is heteronormative. I had to have all these words to say these things. And so I spent like I'm a bookworm. I, luckily for me, loved studying. My parents encouraged it. And then and I'm a people person, so I sought people who shared a form of lived reality that I was, and through them made connections and was intentional about how do I talk about Muslimness? What does Islam
mm,
mean? How does it relate to me? I had to do a lot of internal work
mm, mm,
and understand positionality. Where do I stand with this? What bits of
mm,
Islam do I believe?
mm,
What bits of it are patriarchy? What bits of it are informed by the colonialist experience? What bits of it
mm,
are used by politicians to do power over? So I
mm.
had to do a lot of detangling as well.
It sounds like you've done a lot of detangling, yes,
Yeah.
and lots of things in there really helpful. Thank you, really useful, really great to hear. I got a strong sense again of the kind of visceral nature of doing some of this, of not being understood is a
Mm.
very visceral thing, isn't it? And then needing to use the language in order to do that. But then also the work you've done to maybe separate out the kind of, the I and the me or something like
Mm.
that. What is your social self and what is the genuine Huda kind of thing. You've had to
Yes.
do a lot of kind of work around that. Um, and in all of this kind of learning to speak up and building a community as well. I mean, that's sounds like it's also been important. This is wonderful stuff. Just I'd love to just keep talking then about the practice. So
Yes.
so kind of moving forward to now, even when you're um, you know, and with the Three Hijabis, I mean, you're trying to communicate. You've got a kind of feeling you want to talk about something.
Yes.
How do you go about that? How do you actually take it out there into the world and start to make these? I mean, it sounds like you're trying to change all of this. How do you do that, or how have you done that?
Yeah, so I guess the this I get I talk a lot with friends and sort of in the professional capacities. If I wasn't living under these systems of oppression, what would I do? What would my life be like? And I often turn to the sort of framing of Toni Morrison, who said racism is distraction. And I feel like a lot of my life has been spent being distracted by the like fielding power and saying to power, I am human. Look at me as a human. I am not a threat. I can be multiple. I don't need to be one or the other. I have to prove, that I not only am human. Once I've proved I'm human, I have to prove that I have culture and civility and worth and rights, and then I have to engage with the language of rights that the system chooses to only recognize and not other forms of rights or whatever or ways
Mm-hmm.
of being. So my whole sort of adult life has been spent trying to understand someone else's language and words and codes, and unfortunately that meant my own mother tongue has had to suffer and take a back seat. Um, and so learning the values of the world I operate in and the language it accepts. How do I use those values and language? And what methods are there to speak publicly that will be
Mm-hmm.
palatable? Like a
Mm-hmm.
petition, a campaign. That these are all opting into a democratic process, using the tools that a particular form of power has decided are acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
How do I adapt them so that I get it to accept and enable others who might not have the same experience as me to say that this is a worthwhile endeavor to get involved in?
Mm-hmm.
So the work of the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition or the Three Hijabis has been about leveraging these tools. First of all, understanding them, understanding that there is a system, and that it operates in a certain way, and that it likes a certain language, and it uses things like media, it uses things like campaigning, it uses things like petitions, it uses things like policy briefs. It uses things like advocacy and meeting with the powerful to really inform them to do the change that might trickle down to the bottom of where I am. And so that's the kind of doing that I've had to do. But also, some of this is also about a search for being the authentic Huda. I don't want to live in multiple systems being different. I want these systems to change so that it sees me in my multiplicity. And part of my maturing in this work has been, I no longer want to be schizophrenic in my approach to life. I want to integrate all these things in every aspect of my life and however I move. And part of that is in the place where I work. And so if I am in charge of this organization, and I have been harmed even by the feminists that claim to have my back, because of the systems and structures that they have set up and are complicit in. How do I set up a system and a structure and an organization that doesn't replicate that harm and enables a liberatory approach and the kind of power that you talked about that gives people choices and is generative and is safe? And doing that and fighting the system as an individual or as a collective has been really exhausting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what an incredible kind of hump you have to get over in the first place to even be allowed to kind of engage in the conversation. And then, as you say, you've had to learn all of the kind of tools that belong to that particular kind of system, and then use them only to kind of start to get things to kind of change. I mean, it's an incredible journey, isn't it? Thank you. Could you say a little bit more then about, well, maybe how do you manage your own kind of resilience and in doing all of that then? How have you held it together? I mean,
well, I haven't really. I don't I have a breakdown every night. I think it's I think what I've had a lot of burnout, sickness, and it's been a journey. And I think I'm at an age now where I am both forced to and really appreciate my body more. So I think I'm returning I call it a return to the body, because I've had to, in order to operate in white supremacy, I had to intellectualize everything. And in order for me to do this work without being physically harmed. So I had to do a lot of cerebral stuff. And I think since the age of possibly 27, 28, I began this journey of like, actually, what does it feel like to be this, to be here? And I'm still doing this. So I now have full trust in my feelings in a way that I didn't before, and use them to guide my decisions a lot more. But also they give me a sense check of like how this feels for others. If I'm feeling not okay, then it must not feel okay for others around me. And then so needing to have a community has been a massive part of my resilience, I guess. And the community hasn't been, a identifiable place where I go and it gets better or it's whatever. It's about kind of testing out being in spaces with people and figuring out, I don't fit quite right in this bit, and or maybe that bit is that part of of this particular professional community or religious community, and those people are okay but not others. And so needing to be having I collect tribes, and I think and pick the people that make me feel understood, make me feel safe, that make me feel, and it's a galaxy and a constellation of people that I have to turn to all the time. And so that community maybe exists in my head a lot more and in my heart, rather than kind of is a place to go. And then being in community with the nature and being in relationship with my local, I guess, nature reserve or park, or my patio where I grow my tomatoes and that kind of stuff is, and ultimately my family.
Yeah, where you can go back and kind of breathe and just be yourself to a
Yeah, I
certain
mean,
extent within that.
again, those systemic structures make that hard because I'm a mother that is working, that has children, 2 adult boys. My husband works in the NHS, he operates as a brown doctor, refugee in a secular space where the NHS is constantly in crisis mode, and he's not available to me in the same way. My children are not available to me. I am more responsible for them. But there's something about being home with all that mess, and it's okay to be that mess, and being angry, but also kissing them and hugging them at the same time as being really angry with them, with the world outside, and worried for them at the same time. So yeah, it's a bit messy.
Very messy, beautifully put as well. Yes, what an again, I can kind of identify with that kind of the messiness of life is a very strong thing, isn't it? And also, as you're saying, I mean, having to find a galaxy of communities. I suppose again, I'm curious about when you enter because what I'm hearing is no one community is going to kind of be perfect. Again, the practice of that. So, I mean, I get partly going back and being with your tomatoes, that's kind of helpful. But then when you enter these communities, how do you feel your way? How do you navigate your way through communities to find what you do need?
I think my words and my body tell me.
Okay.
So without knowing it, you are always scanning and sort of risk assessing all the time.
Yeah.
When you walk down the street, when women sort of use transport late at night and walk home, all of that stuff. I guess the awareness that I am doing this helps, but I also have decided that there are places where I just won't go, and it's okay. And I don't, and I've also decided where my capacity is, and like where I choose to be, and the energies I spend. I try to be very intentional about those most of the time. I don't get it right. And I also ensure that, I have space to be, to debrief, that I have access to counseling if I need it. I have access to a friend to moan to, and food, but also the gym. I haven't been to the gym in ages, but for a while I was going through very traumatic, just the world, feeling the heaviness of the world. I used to use exercise as a way of, restoring some of that and the heaviness and removing that heaviness. So yeah,
again, back into your body kind of thing,
yes,
as
really,
a source
like,
of
yeah.
And then great. So and if you then the other bit I was hearing was that the structures and the systems around you are also kind of affecting you, even in your own organization and the organizations you work in. Could you give us some sense of your practice within those? Is it the same thing as when you're entering communities, or are there things that you deliberately kind of put in place, ways of working or something?
Yes, I guess in organizations, and now ultimately, I exercise power even if I don't like it.
Yeah.
So you have to come to terms with that, and you have to really, understand that you have power. And I think I always like to exercise my power through language, and messaging. But actually, now being a director or an executive director or whatever, I literally have power over people. And it's something I'm not very used to, and I constantly have to come to terms with that in how it manifests for other people. And so one of the ways that I try to control it, and I try to reframe it in my mind and practice it is to sit down in community with the team and say, right, how do you want to be as an organization? How do we, like, literally, we did this yesterday and we walked through our values and we said, so what does that look like when we are recruiting? What does that look like when we are putting on an event? What does that look like between us with each other? And so it's about being in all that messiness. I'm both seeking their perspective, but also trying to understand how just having that conversation, I have to be very mindful about how I say the words, when I speak, how much time I enable people, like how do I make them safe to say, I don't really understand what you're saying or whatever. So it really is like maybe I'm just not very good at it, but I'm extremely overwhelmed by it sometimes. And I share that. I said with the team, I was like, I don't really know. I've never done this before. I don't know how I'm supposed to be, but I do know that I want us to be an us and to like be in a space that models power that is generative and that is healing. And I know what I don't want us to be. And are you okay with that? And do you want to be part of that? And how do we do it together? Can you help me put it together? And how do we put it together in a procedural way so that everyone knows what is expected? And then when we grow as an organization or when we move on as people, how does this stay and not go away with us? How do we keep it for others? So we try and constantly search for people in our interactions as an organization that both understand that or are willing to try it and be with us on this experiment.
Because you're trying to create a legacy as well. You're trying to create something structurally that lasts. But I mean, I get the sense that you're doing it incredibly well. It sounds like, I mean, because what I'm hearing is the way you it sounds like you're very conscious and very intentional about what you are saying, but also incredibly authentic. So if you don't understand what's going on, you're saying, I don't understand what, which is, as you said earlier, is probably an experience that lots of people have a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds brilliant to me. And thank you for setting it out so clearly. We're probably moving towards the time when we need to kind of wrap up, but I wanted to give you just a little bit more time, really, just to say anything that you want to say about healthy power and the practice of healthy power. Anything you want at all, really, that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think, I don't know, I feel like even when we try to practice healthy power, we are overwhelmed by like the global scale of toxic power. And it really feels sometimes like, is there any point to this? In the context of what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon and the Congo and Sudan, I'm like, who gives two hoots about my vision and mission for this particular organization? Like, what I'm going out there saying to human rights advocates and agencies that claim to support and enable people from a social justice perspective, oh, you need to care about this subset of women, when the most basic category of human that we could all say, yes, I sign up to that kind of humanity, like children, are being burned alive and nothing is being done. Like there's a whole swell of people that come out on the streets in their thousands every Saturday and say, like, for the love of God, do something about this. This form of power that's happening is not okay because it's extinguishing people that have no power. And so it can be very disheartening to to witness this and think about, oh, I'm sitting here talking about my values and organization. What process shall I have about, holding people to account for their, misdemeanors in not sending an email or whatever, when swathes of people are being exterminated in front of my eyes. And no matter how much I protest and how many other millions of people protest, there are powers that choose violence every single time, and the most horrific form of violence. And so the only way I could carry on is I still have agency, even though it seems overwhelming. I have to do something just for my own humanity, to maintain my own humanity. And so I guess if it's helpful to share with others who do feel like they are a drop in the ocean in a sea of hideousness, your drop matters, because all our drops can come together. We can find each other through community, whether that's online, whether that's physically in protest, or in connection one-to-one. It is possible. Don't give up, because these toxic forms of power want us to be overwhelmed, want us to stop, want us to be burnt out. Please look after yourself. Please do what you need to maintain your physical and emotional safety and integrity, but don't give up. You are allowed to rest. You're not supposed to fix everything. You're just supposed to do the bit that you can see and take that next step. And that's one step at a time. So don't give up.
That's lovely, Huda. Very extremely wise words. Yeah, no, and beautifully put. And again, yes, I can really sense it myself, the difficulty of doing it all. It does raise one more question I've got, actually, well, maybe it's just a comment that, of course, you're, working drop by drop at the local level. You could also be working, in the United Nations or something like that. And I guess you'd say that it's just a choice about where you operate, or...
Well, I think, it's taken us a year of millions and millions of drops, both whether it's a drop at the UN or a drop at the local high street, or it's your local authority, or it's your member of parliament. But it's taken us over a year of complete genocide for the ultimate power in this to say, if you don't let aid in, we're not going to give you some weapons. So I guess what I'm saying is, wherever you operate, at whatever level of power, it can be overwhelming, but don't stop.
And your drops still count.
Yeah, your drop is absolutely necessary, because that one can tip the balance to something slightly, slightly more tempering of the toxicity. But if we keep carrying on, how was apartheid removed?
Sure.
We all did drops for 10 years, and it might take that long, but we can't give up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, Huda. Fabulous to have you. For everybody else who's listening, again, we'll release some more episodes in a little while. And thank you for listening as well, those listeners out there. But Huda, once again, thank you so much. It's been great having you. Maybe we'll get you back in a year or so to just see
why
how
not?
things
Let's
are
see
going.
what happens.
See how the drops are dripping.
Yeah,
where it's
maybe
led to.
we'll have a pond or a lake.
Exactly. That'd be wonderful. But thank you so much. It's been great.
You.